Okay, I backtrack a bit. Okay, so we are now reading the Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses of the Buddha, and we are in the Book of Sixes, and I come to Sutta number 46, which is, the title of it is given as Chunda. And when we come to the first line, there's a little giveaway in this opening about the time the sutta is spoken, the time to which it's ascribed. So we start off, thus have I heard, and then we go, on one occasion, the Venerable Mahacunda was dwelling among the Cheti people at Sahajata. We don't know exactly where this is, but what is the giveaway in the opening, this opening line? Can anybody determine what is being indicated indirectly here?
The Buddha has passed away already.
Exactly, very good. Was that Asmund?
Yes, Bhante.
Oh yeah, very, very good. That's exactly correct. Because usually, even when the Buddha is not the speaker of a sutta, while the Buddha is alive, the sutta will almost invariably begin, thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi or Rajagaha or some other place. But here that's omitted, and so we could see at once that this discourse takes place after the passing of the Buddha. We don't know how long ago the Buddha has passed away. Okay, now the speaker, Mahacunda, and according to the commentaries, Mahacunda was supposed to have been a younger brother of the Venerable Sariputta. But apart from this, and he's mentioned in a number of places in the suttas, but we don't really know very much about him. Okay, so Mahacunda begins the sutta by saying, he addresses his fellow monks, his friends, and he says, here there are bhikkhus who are, I translate this term, Dhamma specialists, and we'll look at the Pali word expression in a moment, who are Dhamma specialists who disparage the monks who are meditators. Okay, so let's look at this word translated Dhamma specialists. So we go to the note. And the word is Dhamma Yoga. So we know the word Dhamma here is taken in the sense of the teaching, the Buddha's teaching. And then we have the word yoga, which in this context, of course, it doesn't mean those bending and stretching exercises that's commonly called yoga today. But the word yoga, one of the senses is being intent or engagement, or being devotion to something. So these will be monks who are intent on the Dhamma, devoted to the Dhamma, and the commentaries identify the Dhamma Yoga as a term for speakers on the Dhamma, which I don't completely agree with. So it's Dhamma Katika. So I say it may refer to those who adopt a predominantly cognitive or sort of intellectual approach to the Dhamma. Those who are intent on sort of examining and investigating the Dhamma and trying to determine the meaning of the Dhamma through examining the meanings of a large number of discourses of the Buddha, maybe who are those who sort of specialize in the more philosophical discourses and try to fathom the deep meaning of the Dhamma through a kind of intellectual investigation. And then I say that this distinction between meditators, which we'll come to, and the Dhamma Yoga, those intent on the Dhamma, suggests a late origin, relatively a late origin to the sutta. So maybe referring to a time when the vocations in the Sangha had divided along these lines. And so we come back to the text. And so we have these monks who are Dhamma specialists, who are devoted to the Dhamma, maybe engaged in this intellectual investigation of the Dhamma. Those disparage other monks who are meditators, who are devoted, maybe who don't rely so heavily on study and investigation of the texts, but who take up a more meditative approach to the Dhamma. And so the monks who are the Dhamma specialists disparage those monks, saying they meditate and cogitate, claiming, we are meditators, we are meditators. And then they say, why do they meditate? In what way do they meditate? How do they meditate? So they're not really asking questions, so the sentences are phrased as questions, but sort of the tone that comes through more clearly in the Pali is that these are kind of rhetorical questions intended to disparage and belittle the monks who are devoted to meditation, especially probably to the samatha or samadhi meditation. Yeah, actually in the Burmese edition, so the Sinhalese and the Pali Text Society edition just has two words, jayanti, pujayanti, but the Burmese edition has four verbs. They're all based on jayanti, which means to meditate, and then the other verbs are formed just by adding prefixes, pujayanti, nijayanti, avajayanti. So maybe they meditate, they meditate in this way, they meditate in that way, they meditate up and down and in and out. So it's a kind of derogatory terms. Okay, so the text continues. So in this case, the monks who are specialists in the Dhamma aren't pleased. And then when they disparage the monks who are meditators, the meditators aren't pleased. And as a result, the text says, they are not practicing for the welfare of many people, for the happiness of many people, for the good welfare and happiness of many people, of human beings and devas. And this passage, as we continue, let me then continue to the next section, then I'll elaborate. Okay, now we have the monks who are the meditators, and usually I have to say in defense of the monks who are meditators, when there's conflict, disputes, divided opinions, they tend to withdraw and live more quietly, peacefully, without getting engaged in arguments and disputes. But here it said that the meditating monks disparage the monks who are Dhamma specialists, saying they are restless, puffed up with conceit, they're vain, talkative, maybe because they're always discussing the Dhamma with each other, rambling in their talk, muddle-minded, they lack mindfulness and clear comprehension, they lack samadhi, so they're unconcentrated, they have wandering minds and uncontrolled sense faculties. And so they go around claiming, we are Dhamma specialists, we are Dhamma specialists. And then they ask their own sort of rhetorical questions. Why do they call themselves Dhamma specialists? In what way are they Dhamma specialists? How are they Dhamma specialists? Again, the questions are intended to belittle and denigrate the Dhamma specialists. So in this case, the meditators aren't pleased, and the Dhamma specialists aren't pleased. And again, they are not practicing for the welfare of many, for the happiness of many, for the good welfare and happiness of the devas and human beings. Okay, so the sutta is pointing, the way we look at it sort of through a maybe historical critical lens, is that it's pointing to a period somewhat later, maybe a few generations later than the time of the Buddha, when a kind of division is starting to take place within the Sangha. And the division will be, as you can see, between the monks who are Dhamma specialists and those who are meditators. And there's another way to look at the Dhamma specialists, because like after the first council, at the first council, the suttas and the Vinaya had been rehearsed by the monks who gathered in Rajagaha, and they compiled the teachings of the Buddha into different collections. And in order to preserve those discourses, the teachings, for later generations, it was necessary for monks, at least for their companies of monks, to emerge who would take on particular task, a particular function. If all of the meditators thought to themselves, if all of the monks and nuns thought to themselves, our task is simply to follow the Buddha's instruction, to go off into solitude, to meditate and attain arhatship, maybe for 1 or 2 generations after the passing of the Buddha, we would have many arahats, but the teachings would have been lost. There would have been no transmission of the actual discourses, the full discourses of the Buddha. Maybe the monks who were meditators would have preserved the particular little limited teachings that they used as a basis for their meditation, but the actual collections would have been lost. So to ensure that the teachings were preserved for posterity, the groups of teachings that were collected at the first council were assigned to companies of monks who had the special function of remembering those teachings, preserving them in mind. Of course, we have to remember in this first 400 years after the passing of Buddha, no writing, the teachings were not written down, but instead, teachings were preserved by memorization. That was always the practice. And so there were monks like Ananda. Ananda was somebody who, according to the tradition, had extraordinary memory so that he could memorize the entire Sutta Pitaka, all the discourses of the Buddha. But other monks did not have that capacity. And so what happened to ensure that the teachings were preserved? Companies emerged that were called Bhanakas. The word Bhanaka, nowadays, I think in Sri Lanka, Bhana has taken on the meaning of being a sermon, but the original meaning of Bhana is to recite. And the Bhanakas are those who recite. And so the monks and probably nuns as well were organized into groups with the particular assignment of memorizing and teaching different collections. And so in the early generation, there were Diga Banakas, Majjhima Banakas, Sangyutta Banakas, and then there were Vinayadharas, those who preserve, maintain the Vinaya Pitaka, and probably a few generations later, maybe even a couple of centuries later, there appear monks called Abhidhammikas, those who specialize in the Abhidhamma. So the Diga Banakas would be those who preserve, memorize, and recite the Diga Nikaya, the suttas of the Diga Nikaya. The Majjhima Banakas are those who preserve, recite, memorize, and teach the Majjhima Nikaya. And so same for the Sangyutta Nikaya, Anguttara Nikaya. There would be Jataka Banakas, those who memorize the Jataka stories, and other kinds of Banakas. The Vinayadharas, who memorize and specialize in the monastic discipline. The Abhidhammikas are those who specialize in the Abhidhamma. And so I think the Dhamma Yoga monks referred to in the suttas could be those who are starting to form into these groups whose task is to memorize, preserve, and transmit these different collections. And even today in the Theravada countries, there are monks who take on this task, even though we have writing, but there are monks who do specialize in memorizing large collections of suttas. In Burma, certainly in the 20th century, there were some monks who were able to memorize the entire Tripitaka. And when I was in Sri Lanka, visiting Sri Lanka in 2006, there was a Burmese monk that I met in Anuradhapura, and his companion told me that he is a Tripitaka-dhara, that's one who's memorized the entire Tripitaka. And he was only in his 40s, but he had that ability. Yeah, my own teacher in Sri Lanka, Venerable Balangoda Ananda Maitreya, also memorized, not the entire Tripitaka, but he memorized a lot of material. And when he was studying English, he entered into a correspondence with Mrs. Rhys Davids, a Pali scholar in England, and she sent him her translation of the Sangyutta Nikaya. It was called, she called it Kindred Sayings. And she had translated some of the books of the Sangyutta Nikaya, and she sent them to him. And the way he improved his knowledge of English was to memorize the entire volumes that she sent him. Okay. So those are could be the meaning of the Dhamma specialists. So the Banakas, those who sort of focus on memorizing collections of suttas or the Vinaya or the Abhidhamma, and then transmit them to the next generation who will also memorize and pass them down. Okay, so we have the first two sections of the sutta. Okay, so now it continues. So the monks who are Dhamma specialists praise only the other monks who are Dhamma specialists, but not the meditators. And then again, this is not for the well-being and happiness of many. And then we have the monks who are meditators. They praise only the monks who are meditators, not those who are dedicated to learning and teaching the Dhamma. And again, this leads to conflict and division. And so the Buddha's advice, or actually the advice of Mahacunda, but with accord with the spirit of the Buddha. So you should train yourselves thus. Those of us who are Dhamma specialists must praise the monks who are meditators. Thus should you train yourselves, and then for what reason? So why should you praise the monks who are meditators? Those persons are astounding and rare in the world who dwell having touched the deathless element with the body. And that's very, very pithy expression. Touching the deathless element with the body. And we have a note to this. Yeah, so just as from the commentary says that the deathless element refers to the nibbana element, which is called the deathless because it's devoid of death. And so having taken up a meditation subject, they progress in stages and they dwell, having touched this deathless element with the mental body. So that is the way the commentary glosses the expression the body, the mental body, or the namakaya. But my understanding would be that this experience of the deathless element, of course you have to realize it with the mind, not with the physical body, but when you actually sort of make that mental contact with the deathless element, the experience is so powerful that it permeates and sort of shakes up and spreads through the body. So it's as if it's actually contacting the deathless with the body. And this is referring to of course, to the realization of Nibbana through the attainment of the world-transcending path and fruit attainment. And to my mind, this expression, I'm also going to track it. I also track that expression in a sutta that occurs in the Iti Vuttaka. Yeah, I took just the Pali that goes, Kayena amatang datum pusaitva nirupading upadipatini sagang sachikatva anasavo te seti samasambuddho asokang virajang padang. So here the phrase that I highlighted, having touched the deathless element with the body, the state that is free from all sort of acquisitions, the relinquishment of acquisitions, having realized that the one without defilements, the fully enlightened one, teaches the sorrowless, dustless state. Yeah, the important point here, in my understanding, there's a view that I've heard coming from some people that Nibbana or the deathless just means the ending of birth and death, or the extinction of defilements in this life, and the ending of the cycle of birth and death, but it doesn't refer to any kind of sort of essential reality. But I think that this phrase shows that it is referring to some kind of essential reality, that it's a real element which is undying, deathless. Because when actually in this life itself, one experiences that deathless element, experiences it in such a concrete, sort of tangible way that it is as if one is experiencing it with the body, or perhaps even touching it, in a sense, with the physical body. Okay, so this, coming back to the sutta, let's get rid of this. Okay, so the reason that you should praise the monks who are meditators, and this would be especially those who through their meditation have reached the paths and fruits, because they dwell having touched the deathless element with the body. In other words, having reached that experiential realization of Nibbana, the deathless, in this life itself. And then the other side also holds that those who are meditators, you should also praise those monks who are Dhamma specialists. And that is how you should train. For what reason? Because those persons are astounding and rare in the world, who see a deep and pithy matter after piercing it through with wisdom. And we have a note here. So the Pali says, Gambirang atapadang panyaya ati vija pasanti. And the commentary says that the deep and pithy matter includes the aggregates, the elements, sense bases, and so forth. This would be all of, say, the principles of the Dhamma, including dependent origination, the Four Noble Truths, all of those deep teachings. And the commentary says that they see this after penetrating it with the wisdom of insight and with the path. But here, I don't think that I would necessarily agree with this. Because if they see this with the wisdom of the path, this means that they've seen the deathless element itself. But I think that this could mean that they have a kind of intellectual wisdom, maybe which also is strengthened through the practice of insight and meditation, by which they can see into the maybe subtle meaning of many Dhamma teachings of the Buddha and see the implications of those statements of the Buddha and see how they can tie together various Dhamma teachings in order to bring out the implicit meaning of the teaching. Yeah, so one thing that emerges from this sutta, the way I look at it, is that it indicates how practitioners, whether monastics or serious lay practitioners, will have different sort of areas of specialization. And so some we have who specialize in meditation, who don't really find it so important or necessary to look into to study the suttas extensively and to investigate them in detail, but who find it enough just to learn some basic instructions in meditation and then to devote themselves to meditation practice. And then there are others, whether monastics or lay people, who enjoy investigating the teachings, sort of studying them, investigating, inquiring into the meaning, trying to learn in detail, looking especially in maybe extensively through the different collections of the discourses in order to find out, the meanings of the teachings. And I think maybe I tend to fall into that category. Like when I was a young monk in Sri Lanka, what I did, I wanted to learn the teachings. And so what I did, after reading the Nikayas and the English translations available at that time, I made up numerous headings, especially of the Dhamma, taking the Four Noble Truths, 5 aggregates, the 12 sense bases, the elements, dependent origination, then yoniso manasikara, wise attention, noble eightfold path, then right view, right mindfulness, right concentration, then under the heading of insight, impermanence, suffering, non-self, I made those headings. Then I read through the discourses again. By that time, I had learned Pali well enough to read them. And whenever I came across an important statement about any of those principles, then I would note the occurrence of that sutta under that heading. So that's why Bowe here says that Bhante is a walking Nikaya. That's how I became a walking Nikaya, by noting the occurrence of all of these passages, or at least many of them, in the places where they occur under the appropriate heading. Okay, so what does the Buddha say about the relationship between learning and practice? So as I said, the sutta seems to indicate or suggest that it is referring to developments that took place at a somewhat later time, maybe several generations after the passing of the Buddha, when specializations are starting to take place. But the kind of ideal advice that we find from the Buddha himself, I collected a few relevant passages. Okay, so here we have a sutta about, this is from the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours, 4 qualities that make one an elder. So the word here is tera. It doesn't necessarily mean that one is old. The original meaning of tera, of elder, of course, in English is an old person. And in tera, it's a kind of term of respect. And so first, the monk has to be virtuous, restrained by the rules of discipline. Then the second is that one has learned much, that one remembers what one has learned, accumulates it, and as for those teachings that are good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, one has learned much of those teachings, preserved them in memory, recites them verbally, investigates them with the mind, and penetrates them well by view, that is, by understanding. Okay, but that's not enough. Then one should go further, ideally, and be able to gain at will, without trouble or difficulty, the 4 jhanas, the 4 meditative absorptions. So that would make one a meditator. Quality number 2, this would make one a Dhamma yoga, one sort of who memorizes, learns, memorizes, and transmits the Dhamma. Quality number 3 makes one a meditator with the specializing in samadhi meditation. But then one has to go further to number 4, that one has realized through direct knowledge that taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom. So one uses the jhanas to develop insight, and then through insight wisdom, one eradicates the taints or defilements and gains liberation. So that is sort of the ideal standard, what makes one an elder in the superior sense. Okay, then there's another sutta in the Book of Fives, actually very similar. So what are the qualities that make an elder monk pleasing and agreeable to his fellow monks? So one is virtuous, restrained by the rules of discipline. One has learned much and remembers what one has learned. One is a good speaker with a good delivery so that one can expound the Dhamma well. So this is the additional quality. Then one gains at will the four jhanas, and one has realized that liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom. And so you can see that the Buddha emphasizes that one should ideally possess learning and meditative experience of the samadhi or the jhanas, and then attain liberation. And then there's another sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha raises the question, how does a monk dwell in the Dhamma? And he speaks about some monks who pass the entire day just in learning the Dhamma, but they neglect seclusion and don't devote themselves to serenity of mind. But the Buddha says that the ideal monk, the one who truly dwells in the Dhamma, is one who learns the Dhamma, but doesn't just devote all his time to learning and neglecting seclusion, neglecting meditation, but he's one who devotes himself to inner serenity of mind, that is to the development of samadhi, that's in sutta number 73, and in sutta number 74, one who goes further and understands the meaning with wisdom, that is, who develops insight meditation. Okay, so maybe that should do for our overview of Sutta, of the Anguttara Nikaya 6's Sutta number 46. So at this point, we could see if there's any questions. Okay, first we see if anybody who's in the room has any questions. Okay, so I see some hand symbols in the Zoom box. So we start with Farah. So you unmute yourself. Yeah, you have to unmute. Okay, we'll go to Vandana. Okay, you're unmuted now, Vandana.
Thank you. Thank you, Bhante, for the teaching. Actually, this topic is very interesting to me from the beginning, that how do one practice? We need both. We both need knowledge of what to practice. Like meditation itself has some instructions we follow in the beginning. Yeah, so for me, but I also think that Buddha himself sat under the Bodhi tree meditating to get that calm, so he can see the reality, the true nature of things.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, yeah. So, but you're right that both should be done in a moderate, no, in a reasonable way.
Repeat again.
I think that as you were saying, the meditation brings the wisdom, and some people say wisdom brings the calmness or serenity. So that's the difficult for people like me. So I need to meditate to calm my mind down, because mind is always so
Yeah.
busy. So much conditioning is there that unless I had to peel them layer by layer, I won't be able to see the true nature or the understand even the suttas correctly. So that's how I see it, that meditation, for me, meditation should be the one go first. But yeah, but the knowledge, we need that knowledge also, which Buddha got. And yeah, that's I just wanted to make this comment.
Yeah, I agree with that, sort of in our everyday life, because the mind tends to get disturbed, agitated with a lot of, the input of our day-to-day experience. There's worries, plans, fears, memories, hopes, expectations, and so on. And so those are the things that sort of cause a lot of internal stress and conflict and restlessness. So our basic task, I say, in the day-to-day practice is to develop greater calmness, greater concentration. So that's why I say for people in day-to-day life, people say, I'm practicing vipassana. But really what we do in our day-to-day practice is practice a kind of samatha or serenity. So I usually would recommend like mindfulness of breathing or the loving kindness meditation, which bring greater serenity. To reach the actual goal of the Buddha's teaching, we have to develop vipassana or insight. But generally, real insight arises on the basis of a calm and collected mind. So
Exactly.
basic task in everyday practice is to collect the mind through some kind of samatha practice. The way in my own experience, I can only do real vipassana in a retreat situation, not in everyday life. Even
I
the people who do, I'm sorry to disillusion people, but those who do the Goenka meditation, where so you learn, well, actually you do some anapanasati, but then you do the scanning of the sensations of the body. Yeah, if you could immediately tune into the sensations of the body, I'd say that that is a kind of preliminary stage of vipassana, but it's not yet really, if you're just tuning into the sensations of the body, it's not yet the real vipassana insight. That requires, in my experience, the momentum that comes through a retreat situation.
I just want to make a very short comment here. So when I started meditation, I didn't even know anything about the Goenka or the body sensations, but through meditation, I started to feel those sensations, but I didn't know what is going on. I was worried, is something wrong with my body? Now I can feel everything.
Yeah.
So then I got to learn that. So for me, it's like, it was very interesting that then I knew, oh no, this is nothing wrong. I became more and more mindful of my own sensations, like my brain is moving, my heart is moving, my everything in the body is moving. Now I just live like that everything is moving, and I accepted it because I know now that this is the right, it's not nothing wrong with me.
Yeah, yeah. When you're experiencing the sensations itself, yeah, I would still not call that vipassana, but it has a kind of calming effect. The vipassana actually occurs when one starts to see the arising and passing of the sensations.
Yes.
But it's through that scanning of the body and tuning into sensations that you sort of build up the momentum that will lead to seeing the sort of rapid arising and vanishing of the sensations. And that becomes the true insight.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on, and the questions. So the next will be Chris, and you unmute. Yeah, you have to unmute.
Okay, there we
Okay,
go.
now, okay.
Okay, that's it. Thank you for this opportunity. And just a quick question/comment. Before I came on, I had this thought, And it was, I think, reinforced by the reading that we had today, where he's talking about getting in contact with the eternal. And I'm wondering if it's correct to rephrase that in this way, that hiding in the mundane is the eternal, and like that that maybe like that's kind of what the Buddha saw in a profound way, but that the eternal is in the day-to-day mundane. And I just wanted to get your comments on that. And thank
Did you
you.
say eternal or internal?
Eternal, the eternal hiding in the mundane and seeing that. Do you think that's a correct reformulation of what you read earlier?
It's an original expression.
Okay, well, I'll take that.
So I haven't seen anything quite like that. But what I would say is that sort of this is more canonical, that one discovers the eternal or the deathless element by penetrating the nature of worldly phenomena or conditioned phenomena. And so it's through seeing into the impermanence. Like there are three ways of characterizing Nibbana: the signless, the wishless, and the empty or emptiness. And it's through penetrating impermanence that one realizes Nibbana as the signless. By penetrating the characteristic of dukkha or suffering, that one realizes Nibbana as the wishless or desireless. And by penetrating the characteristic of non-self, that one experiences or realizes Nibbana through the aspect of emptiness. Okay, we'll just have to
thank
move
you.
on now and take the next question. Kilaya?
Thank you, Bhante. I find this sutta very interesting because Mahacunda is one of the only monks that I've encountered in the suttas that I feel some criticism for. And I'm wondering if you connect him with the same Mahacunda in the Majjhima Nikaya Sutta 8, Saleka Sutta, and the Samyutta Nikaya 3587, where he appears with Channa. And I feel there's worthy criticism of him in both of these other suttas. And it seems like this sutta also, he doesn't really make a very good point other than bringing two sides together, which of course is a very good way of speaking to try and unite two sides. But I think your point is that it's not a complete and overly helpful description of these two sides of the teachings. So my main question is, do you see this character as connected with the same Mahacunda in the other suttas? And if so, would you see that he is a questionable character in the suttas?
Oh no, first he's certainly not a questionable character, because he's regarded as like one of the great Arahat disciples. I remember sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, sutta number 8, where he comes to the Buddha and he speaks about, I think, about the jhanas as being saleka, as the erasure of defilements. And the Buddha says that that is not the erasure of defilements. And then the Buddha gives like 44 ways of erasing defilements. The other sutta you referred to, 8?
Yeah, the other sutta also, he's critical. He's critical of Channa in the Samyutta Nikaya, and he's critical of these other bhikkhus who claim, who are making claims in the Saleka Sutta. So he's critical of other monks in both of these suttas.
And what is the sutta in the Samyutta Nikaya?
It's Channa, which is in 3587 in Salayatana Samyutta. You title it Channa. Channa is using the knife in this one. It's quite a renowned sutta.
Okay, now I remember. Okay, so this is where that monk Channa is, he's sort of frustrated because he has this illness and he's not able to,
He's ill and he's not happy, and he uses the knife. And Mahacunda says that he shouldn't have, that he wasn't realized. And the Buddha criticizes him in the end with saying, no, he was realized, and you should remember him as so.
Yeah, maybe there was a criticism there because the Buddha could realize things that Mahacunda didn't. But Mahacunda is not regarded as, in any sense, I mean, he's regarded as one of the great Arahat disciples. Even that the prefix of his name, Maha, means great, so he's one of the great disciples. Yeah, anyway, I'll have to look into that. Let us just move on with the questions because the time is running out. So I'll take Doran.
Thank you, Bhante. Is it fair to summarize that study serves as the foundation for practice, but perhaps it's not the final word? The final word would be practice, and practice verifies what you have studied?
Yeah, that would be exactly the case.
And I wanted to add a couple of things. One is the Kalama Sutta, where the Buddha talks to the Kalama people and he tells them, regardless of what you study, who you study, you have to find out for yourselves. And I think what he's meaning is referring to practice. You have to try the taste of it for yourselves before you make any conclusions, and make the conclusions on your own. So try it for yourselves, I think, means practice there. And another thing was a question whether the raft simile that the Buddha uses, where you have to take the raft to get to the other side, but then you leave the raft. Maybe that's sort of, raft is the study here, and then you leave the raft once you have it and you've made it.
Yeah, actually that is a good illustration of that point. So that is in the Alagadupama Sutta, the simile of the raft, where a man comes to a bank of a river and he wants to get across to the other side. And so he builds, there's no boat available, so he constructs a raft. Then he uses that raft to get across the river to the other shore. Okay, but then he thinks that this raft has been very useful to me, so let me put it on my head and carry it around, or on my back. And so he takes it wherever he goes. And then the Buddha says that man is not using the raft for its proper purpose. And so what he should do when he gets to the other side is just tie the raft up or let it float down the river. And this is analogous. In a way, the simile doesn't really work so perfectly, because he's saying that a person who learns the Dhamma but doesn't use it for practice, who doesn't put it into practice, is like the man who puts the raft on his head and just carries it around. So that's somebody who, he says, learns the Dhamma, and then he visits the suttas, the various kinds of suttas, and then he just uses that, he uses his knowledge for criticizing, for trying to triumph in arguments and to find faults with the positions of others. So that is like the person who carries around the raft on his head. Yeah, the point there, that's the point, is that often we speak of three aspects of the Dhamma. We have pariyatti, patipatti, and pativeda. And we say that all three are essential. So pariyatti means learning, like learning the teaching. And of course, different people will have different extent, different degrees of how much Dhamma they have to learn. Some people, in fact, there's a famous verse in the Dhammapada, even if one learns many teachings, but does not put them into practice, that is like a man who counts the cattle of others, but doesn't own the cattle. Okay, but so that's the person who learns much without putting it into practice, but then in contrast is the one who learns a little but puts it into practice and thereby abandons lust, hatred, and delusion. So that is like, I think, the person who owns the cattle. Okay, so we go from pariyatti, learning, to patipatti is practice, and then based on practice comes pativeda, realization, the attainment of realization. Okay, I think we're going to have to come to an end for the day. Okay, so we'll be ending. Before we do the sharing of the merits, I should mention next Saturday we won't be having the class because we have, that is the extension of the July 4th weekend. So we have the Dharma camp here at the monastery. Okay, so the next class will be the Saturday after that. I think it's July 13th. Okay, so let us end now with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits with the devas, the nagas, and the other beings, asking them to protect the Dhamma, to protect the teaching, and to protect ourselves and others. So I'll recite the verse in Pali. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyanta manumoditva chirang rakantu mang parang. Dukkha pata chani dukkha bhaya pata chani bhaya soka pata chani soka hantu sabbe pipanino. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. And then we can go sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And then we'll do three.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
We'll end with three bows to the Buddha. Yeah, but before we do that, I just want to call your attention to a little gift that somebody gave us a couple of weeks ago. You see it behind me. It's an image of just of the hand of the Buddha in the teaching position. And he's holding a flower. That's supposed to be the legendary origin of the Zen tradition, where the Buddha holds up a flower in front of the assembly, and only Mahakashyapa understands the meaning. Yeah, Jason just. Yeah, now you can see it. Okay.
Oh, that's lovely.
Nice, Bhante.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jason.
Beautiful.
Yeah, very beautiful. That's you.
Very beautiful.
Okay. Okay, so we'll end with three bows.
And a bow to Bhante Bodhi. Thank you, Bhante. Bow
Thank
to
you
Bhante.
all for joining.
Thank you,
Thank
Bhante.
you,
Thank you,
Have a good
Bhante.
lunch, Bhante.
Have a good lunch, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Everyone Sadnai Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Namo Buddhaya.
Thank you,
Everyone Sadnai
Namo.
Bhante. We'll see you a week from now. See you 2 weeks from
Well,
now.
see you in 2 weeks.
See you 2 weeks from now. Thank you, Bhante. Namo Buddhaya. Everyone Sadnai.
care. See everybody.
Okay, I'm going to
Be
turn
safe
off.
and well, Bhante.
Okay, thank you.
You Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Take care.